The orchard looked beautiful during the day. That was the first thing I noticed when I arrived in northern Michigan. Endless rows of apple trees stretched across rolling hills, their branches heavy with bright red fruit that shimmered beneath the autumn sun. The air smelled sweet and cold, like fresh cider and wet leaves. If you stood still long enough, you could hear the wind moving through the orchard like whispers. At first, it felt peaceful. Too peaceful. I had taken the job because I was desperate. After getting laid off from my warehouse job in Detroit, I needed fast money. Rent was overdue, my car barely ran, and every online application I submitted disappeared into silence. So when I found a seasonal job posting for orchard workers paying almost double minimum wage, I didn't ask many questions. The listing was simple. Night harvest workers needed. Housing included. Follow the rules. I should have paid more attention to that last part. The owner of the orchard, a tall gray-haired man named Walter Grady, picked me up from the bus stop himself. He barely spoke during the drive. The farther north we traveled, the emptier the roads became. Dense forests surrounded us for miles, broken only by abandoned barns and rusted silos. Eventually, we turned onto a dirt road lined with dead trees. At the end sat the orchard. The farmhouse looked ancient, its white paint peeling beneath years of harsh winters. Beside it stood several worker cabins illuminated by weak yellow lights. Behind everything stretched the orchard itself, massive, endless, swallowing the hills in every direction. Walter parked the truck and finally looked at me. "You ever work nights before?" "Yeah," I said. "Warehouse shifts." "That's different." He handed me a folded sheet of paper. "These are the rules. Read them carefully. Every worker gets the same list." I laughed a little. "Seriously?" Walter didn't smile. "If you break them," he said quietly, "I can't protect you." That sentence stayed with me long after he walked away. Inside my cabin, I unfolded the paper. There were 13 rules typed neatly in black ink. Rule 1. Never enter the orchard after midnight unless instructed. Rule 2. If you hear whistling between the trees, stop moving immediately. Rule 3. Do not look toward the hills during fog. Rule 4. If someone calls your name from inside the orchard, do not answer unless you see their face first. Rule 5. The woman in white is not an employee. Rule 6. Lock your cabin windows before 1:13 a.m. Rule 7. If apples begin falling without wind, leave the area immediately. Rule 8. Never harvest from row 13. Rule 9. If you see lights moving underground, notify Walter. Rule 10. The scarecrows must remain facing north. Rule 11. If you wake up and your cabin door is open, pretend you are still asleep. Rule 12. Missing workers are not to be discussed after dark. Rule 13. If you see someone standing among the trees smiling at you, do not let them know you noticed. At the bottom was one final sentence. The orchard feeds itself eventually. I stared at the page for a long time. Obviously, I assumed it was some weird prank. Maybe the owner liked messing with new workers. Maybe it was tradition. Still, something about the rules unsettled me, especially because none of them sounded random. They sounded experienced. Like every rule existed because someone had already died breaking it. That night, I met the other workers in the main barn before our shift started. There were only 6 of us. An older guy named Curtis, who barely spoke. 2 college students from Ohio. A middle-aged woman named Elena. A teenager everyone called Buck. And me. Nobody joked around. Nobody laughed. The atmosphere inside the barn felt tense, like everyone was constantly listening for something outside. Buck noticed me staring at the rules paper sticking from my jacket pocket. "You read 'em?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Pretty creepy." Nobody reacted. Elena slowly looked up from tying her gloves. "You think they're fake?" I shrugged. "I mean, aren't they?" The entire barn went silent. Curtis stopped loading crates. Even the college kids avoided eye contact. Then Buck leaned closer to me. "Don't whistle out there," he whispered. Before I could respond, the barn doors suddenly slammed shut from the wind outside. Everyone flinched. Every single one of them. That should have been my warning. The first few hours passed normally enough. We worked beneath portable floodlights, harvesting apples beneath the freezing Michigan night sky. The orchard looked completely different after dark. The trees seemed taller somehow, twisted. Their branches tangled together overhead like skeletal fingers blocking out the moonlight. The deeper you walked between the rows, the quieter everything became. No crickets, no owls, no wind, just silence. Around 11 p.m., I noticed something strange. The scarecrows. There were dozens of them scattered throughout the orchard. Old wooden crosses dressed in rotten flannel shirts and burlap sacks. But every single one faced north, exactly like the rules said. At one point, I passed one close enough to notice something tied around its neck. Animal bones. I tried not to think about it. Near midnight, fog began rolling across the hills. Thick fog. The kind that swallowed entire rows of trees within seconds. Immediately, all the workers started packing equipment. "We're done," Elena said quickly. "What? Already?" "Nobody stays after midnight. But we still have hours left." Curtis grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "You don't understand this place yet." That was when we heard the whistle. Far away. Soft. Somewhere deep in the orchard. Everyone froze instantly. The whistle came again. A slow, uneven tune drifting between the trees. Buck looked terrified. "Don't move," he whispered. I remembered Rule 2. If you hear whistling between the trees, stop moving immediately. So we stood there silently. The whistle grew closer. Closer. Then I heard footsteps crunching through leaves nearby. Something was moving through the orchard. Not an animal. Too heavy. The fog shifted slightly between the rows ahead of us. And I saw someone standing there. Tall. Perfectly still. Smiling. At first, I thought it was another worker. Then I realized something horrifying. It was too tall. Its arms hung almost to its knees. Its smile stretched impossibly wide across its face. And its eyes. God. Its eyes reflected light like an animal's. The thing tilted its head slowly toward us. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The whistle stopped. For several seconds, the creature simply stood there smiling through the fog. Then somewhere behind us, one of the college kids panicked and ran. The moment he moved, the smiling thing vanished into the trees. The screaming started seconds later. We heard branches snapping, heavy footsteps, then a horrible wet crunch. The screams lasted less than 10 seconds. Nobody went after him. Nobody even spoke. Curtis just whispered, "Don't look." But I did look, and I regret it every day. Far between the trees, illuminated by faint moonlight, I saw something dragging the boy deeper into the orchard. Something enormous. Too thin. Too long. Its limbs bent wrong as it disappeared into the fog. Back at the cabins, nobody called the police. Nobody searched. Walter simply sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee like this had happened before. He ran, Walter said calmly. "Rules exist for a reason." "That thing killed him," I shouted. Walter's eyes slowly lifted toward me. "You saw it?" The room became silent. Even the workers looked nervous. Finally, Walter stood and walked toward the window overlooking the orchard. "You're lucky it only saw you once," he muttered. "What the hell is out there?" Walter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared into the darkness beyond the glass. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "It wasn't always just one." That night, I barely slept. The cabin felt freezing despite the heater running nonstop. Outside, wind scraped branches against the walls like fingernails. At exactly 1:13 a.m., every dog on the property started barking at once. Then suddenly stopped. Silence followed. Complete silence. I remembered Rule 6. Lock your cabin windows before 1:13 a.m. Heart pounding, I checked every latch twice. That's when I noticed something outside my bedroom window. A figure standing between the trees. A woman dressed entirely in white. She stood motionless in the darkness, partially hidden by branches. Watching my cabin, I remembered Rule 5 immediately. The woman in white is not an employee. She slowly raised one hand toward the glass. Then she smiled. Not a normal smile. The same impossible smile the creature had worn in the orchard. I stumbled backward in panic. When I looked again, she was gone. A soft knock echoed from my cabin door. 3 slow knocks. Then a woman's voice whispered softly from outside. "Can you let me in?" I didn't answer. Another knock. "Please." The voice sounded wrong somehow, like multiple voices speaking together beneath hers. I backed away from the door, unable to breathe. Then I noticed something even worse. The door handle was slowly turning, very slowly, as if whoever stood outside already knew the lock wouldn't stop them forever. And then, from somewhere beneath the cabin floorboards, I heard whistling. The door handle stopped moving the second the whistling started beneath the floor. Not outside. Not in the orchard. Under me. The sound drifted upward through the wooden boards like someone crawling beneath the cabin itself. Slow. Careless. Almost playful. I couldn't move. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The windows were locked. The woman outside hadn't moved. I could still see her pale silhouette standing near the tree line through the curtains, waiting. The whistle under the floor grew louder. Then came scratching. Something was dragging itself beneath the cabin. I backed into the corner of the room, gripping the old hunting knife Walter had left in the kitchen drawer earlier that evening. At the time I thought it was for coyotes. Now I wasn't so sure. The scratching stopped directly under my bed. Silence followed. Then a loud thump shook the entire cabin from below. Dust rained from the ceiling. Another thump. Harder this time. The floorboards creaked beneath me as if something massive was pressing against them from underneath. Then came the voice. "Open the door." It sounded exactly like the college kid who'd been dragged into the orchard earlier. Every hair on my body stood up. "Please," the voice whimpered. "It hurts." I knew it wasn't him. There was no way anyone could survive what I'd seen. Still, hearing his voice almost broke me. It sounded terrified. Human. Real. Another thump rattled the cabin. The woman outside began knocking softly on the window now. Tap, tap, tap. I squeezed my eyes shut. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Then suddenly, all the noises stopped at once. No scratching. No knocking. No whistling. Nothing. The silence felt even worse. After several minutes, exhaustion finally overtook panic. I don't even remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up, because my cabin door was open, wide open. Cold morning air drifted inside, and muddy footprints covered the floor. I froze instantly. Rule 11. If you wake up and your cabin door is open, pretend you're still asleep. My heart nearly exploded. I kept my eyes barely shut, forcing myself not to move. At first, I thought I was alone. Then I heard breathing. Someone was inside the cabin with me. Slow breathing. Wet breathing. Standing very close to the bed. I could smell rotting apples and damp soil. The thing leaned closer. So close I could feel its breath touching my face. Every muscle in my body trembled, but somehow I stayed still. Then I heard it whisper. He looked at me too. The voice sounded broken, distorted, like several people speaking through one throat. The mattress shifted slightly beside me. Something had climbed onto the bed. I nearly lost control right there. Its face hovered inches above mine. I could feel it staring, waiting for me to react. Seconds stretched into forever. Then finally, the weight lifted from the mattress. Footsteps crossed the cabin floor slowly. The door creaked, and silence returned. I stayed frozen another 10 minutes before finally opening my eyes. The cabin was empty, but scratched into the wall beside my bed were 3 words. Don't look north. That morning, nobody mentioned the missing worker. Nobody even said his name. The remaining workers ate breakfast in silence while Walter stood at the stove cooking eggs like everything was normal. I finally snapped. What the hell is happening here? Walter didn't answer. I almost got killed last night. Still nothing. Then Elena quietly spoke without looking up from her coffee. You survived, she said. That means it's curious about you. I stared at her. What does that even mean? She finally looked up. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes like bruises. The orchard chooses certain people. That's insane. No, Curtis muttered from across the table. Insane is staying after it knows your face. I slam my hands on the table. Will somebody just tell me what's out there? Walter finally sighed. Then he stood and walked toward the window again. The orchard was planted in 1881, he said quietly. Before that, this land belonged to a mining town. Nobody interrupted him. There was silver beneath the hills. Hundreds of workers came here looking for money. But during winter, people started disappearing. His eyes drifted toward the distant orchard rows. At first they blamed wolves, then kidnappers, then disease. He paused, but the bodies kept returning. A cold feeling spread through my stomach. What bodies? Walter looked at me carefully. The ones that came back smiling. Nobody spoke after that. Outside, wind rolled through the orchard trees. I suddenly understood why every worker looked exhausted all the time. This place wasn't a job. It was survival. That evening, thick clouds covered the sky before sunset. The entire orchard darkened early beneath approaching rain. Walter gathered us near the equipment shed before the shift began. Nobody works beyond row 10 tonight, he said firmly. Why? Buck asked. Walter hesitated, then quietly answered. Because row 13 moved. Nobody reacted except me. What do you mean moved? Curtis immediately muttered. Don't ask. But I did ask. What the hell does that mean? Walter rubbed his tired eyes. The rows change sometimes after storms. That makes no sense. You'll understand eventually. That answer terrified me more than anything else. We started harvesting shortly after dark. Rain drizzled lightly through the branches while floodlights illuminated narrow pathways between the trees. Every shadow looked wrong, twisted, and everywhere I looked, the scarecrows stood facing north, watching. Around 10 p.m., Buck suddenly stopped walking. You hear that? We all listened. At first I heard nothing except rain. Then faintly, laughter. Children laughing somewhere deep in the orchard. Elena immediately turned pale. No, she whispered. Walter grabbed his flashlight. Everybody back to the barn. Now. The laughter echoed again. Closer this time. High-pitched. Dozens of voices giggling between the trees. But there were no children here. The floodlights flickered once, then died completely. Darkness swallowed the orchard instantly. Panic erupted. Someone screamed. Rain hammered through the leaves while distant laughter circled around us from every direction. Walter shouted, "Don't run." Then something moved through the trees beside me. Fast. Too fast. Branches snapped violently as a shape darted past the darkness. Buck cried out suddenly. It touched me. Lightning flashed overhead for one brief second. And in that flash, I saw them. Children standing between the apple trees. At least 20 of them. All smiling. Their clothes looked ancient, dirt-covered, torn apart. Their eyes reflected white in the darkness. Another lightning flash. Now, they were closer. None of them blinked. The smallest one tilted her head unnaturally sideways and whispered, "Come play." The orchard exploded with whistling. Not one whistle. Hundreds. Every direction. The children began moving toward us slowly through the rain. Walter grabbed me violently. Do not let them surround you. We sprinted blindly through the orchard while laughter chased us between the rows. Shapes moved beside us constantly. Sometimes crawling. Sometimes running on all fours. At one point I heard footsteps directly overhead among the branches. Something was climbing above us, through the trees. Then Buck screamed again. I turned just in time to see small pale hands dragging him backward into the darkness. There were too many of them. Children surrounded him instantly, but their mouths stretched far too wide. Buck's screams became gargled. Wet. Then silence. Walter pulled me forward before I could process what I'd seen. The barn finally appeared ahead through the rain. We slammed the doors shut behind us. Everyone inside was shaking violently. Everyone except Walter. Because Walter looked defeated. Like he'd seen this too many times already. Then came the sound from outside. Tiny footsteps circling the barn. And children whispering softly through the walls. Let us in. The whispering continued for hours. None of us slept. Near dawn, the voices finally disappeared. But when sunlight returned, we found small muddy handprints covering every barn window, all facing inward. Nobody spoke during breakfast the next morning. Not after Buck disappeared. Not after the handprints. The entire orchard felt wrong now, like the land itself had become aware of us. Even the air seemed heavier, colder. Rain clouds still hung low above the hills, turning the morning gray and lifeless. Walter sat alone at the kitchen table staring at an old map spread before him. His coffee had gone untouched for hours. I finally walked over. You knew that was going to happen. Walter didn't deny it. The children only come after storms, he muttered. Children? I snapped. Those things tore Buck apart. Walter slowly folded the map. They were children once. A long silence followed. Then he looked directly at me for the first time since I arrived. You want the truth? I nodded. His face hardened. In 1924, this orchard burned. The room grew still. There was a boarding house here back then. Families, workers, children. Walter's voice sounded distant now, like he was reciting something he'd repeated too many times. One night, every tree in the orchard bloomed at the same time. Out of season. I frowned. What does that mean? It means the ground woke up. A chill crept down my spine. Walter continued. People started hearing voices underground, singing beneath the roots. Then workers began vanishing. The owner blamed the miners living in the hills. He paused. But one night, the children walked into the orchard together. I stared at him. Walked. They said someone was calling them. The kitchen suddenly felt freezing. The parents searched all night. By morning, Walter swallowed hard. They found every child standing in row 13. My mouth went dry. What happened to them? Walter's eyes drifted toward the window. They were smiling. No one spoke after that. Even Curtis looked disturbed hearing the story again. Then Elena whispered something quietly from the corner. It keeps the ones it likes. Walter didn't respond, but he didn't disagree either. That afternoon, I decided I was leaving. I didn't care about the money anymore. I didn't care about the job. Whatever existed in that orchard wasn't natural, and every second spent there felt like standing closer to a cliff edge. I packed my bag immediately, but when I stepped outside toward my car, I stopped cold. All 4 tires were slashed, not punctured, shredded, and carved across the hood in deep scratches were the words, "Stay until harvest." My stomach dropped. I spun around, expecting someone to be watching, but the orchard stood silent beneath the gray sky. Walter appeared behind me suddenly. You can't leave right now. I rounded on him. You knew this would happen too? He looked exhausted. It doesn't let people leave during harvest season. That's insane. It's hungry. I laughed bitterly. No, I'm done listening to this cult garbage. There's somebody out there doing this. Walter stepped closer. You think a person dragged Buck through the trees? I didn't answer, because deep down I knew better. That night, the fog returned thicker than ever. The workers stayed inside the barn, reinforcing doors and covering windows with wooden boards. Nobody planned on harvesting. Not tonight. Walter handed each of us a flashlight and a hunting knife. What are these supposed to do? I asked. Nothing, he admitted. But people panic less holding something. That answer terrified me more than if he'd lied. By midnight, the fog completely swallowed the orchard. You couldn't see more than 10 feet beyond the barn doors. Then the bells started ringing. Slow, distant. Church bells echoing somewhere deep in the fog. Dong, dong, dong. Elena immediately covered her ears. No. Curtis whispered. They found the church again. I looked at Walter. What church? But before he could answer, someone knocked on the barn door. 3 soft knocks. Everyone froze. Another knock followed. Then a man's voice called from outside. Help me. The voice sounded weak. Injured. It's cold out here. Walter's face turned pale instantly. Nobody moved. The knocking continued. Please. Then I realized something horrifying. I recognized the voice. Buck. Curtis grabbed my arm before I could move. That's not him anymore. The knocking slowly became scratching, long nails dragging across wood. Then came another voice beside it. A little girl. Please let us inside.
More voices joined. Dozens. Men.
Women.
Children.
All whispering softly beyond the barn walls. The fog outside shifted strangely, and shadows began appearing behind the cracks in the wooden boards. Standing there, watching, one of the college kids who remained, a nervous guy named Trevor, finally broke. "We can't just leave them out there," Walter shouted. "Don't open that door." Too late. Trevor ripped away one of the wooden planks covering the entrance window. For half a second, I saw what stood outside. Not people.
Things.
Pale faces crowded together unnaturally close, smiling through the fog. Their eyes looked cloudy and dead. Mud and roots protruded from their skin like veins. And all of them were staring directly at Trevor. The thing wearing Buck's face smiled widest of all. Then every voice outside screamed at once. The barn doors exploded inward. Chaos erupted instantly. The fog poured inside, carrying dozens of shapes with it. Trevor disappeared first. Something grabbed his legs and dragged him screaming across the floor into the darkness outside. Blood streaked behind him before vanishing into the fog. Walter fired a shotgun blindly into the entrance. The blast illuminated the creatures for one horrifying second. Human bodies twisted together wrong. Extra limbs. Broken jaws hanging loose. Faces stretched open impossibly wide. And behind all of them, something enormous stood within the fog. Tall enough its head nearly touched the orchard trees. Watching. Smiling. The same creature I'd seen that first night. Except now I saw its full shape. Its skin looked bark-like, cracked and dark like deadwood. Long roots hung from its arms like veins. Human faces protruded from parts of its body, trapped beneath the surface, silently screaming. The thing took one slow step toward the barn. The ground shook beneath it. Walter immediately shouted, "Get to the cellar." We ran. The creatures flooded after us through the barn while distant bells echoed across the orchard. Elena was pulled backward halfway down the cellar stairs. I still hear her screaming sometimes. Walter slammed the heavy cellar doors shut just as dozens of hands began pounding against them from above. The cellar beneath the barn was ancient. Stone walls, rotting shelves, and at the very center, a massive tree root burst through the floor. Except it wasn't just a root. It pulsed, like breathing flesh. The entire cellar smelled like wet soil and rotten apples. I stared at Walter in horror. "What is that?" He looked completely broken now. "That's the heart." The pounding upstairs continued violently. Dust fell from the ceiling with every impact. "The orchard grows from it," Walter whispered. "Feeds from it." "What I ess it?" Walter finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. It was never a mine beneath these hills. The cellar suddenly trembled. A deep sound echoed upward from somewhere below us. Not an earthquake. Breathing. Something enormous was alive under the orchard. Then the root in the center of the cellar moved. Just slightly. Like something beneath the floor had shifted in its sleep. And somewhere far underground, something whistled back. The whistling beneath the cellar didn't sound human. It sounded ancient. Deep. Massive. Like air moving through something far larger than lungs. The root in the center of the floor twitched again, and this time I saw faces moving beneath its bark-like surface. Human faces. Distorted and half-formed, trapped inside the wood as if the tree itself had consumed them. Some of them were still moving. I stumbled backward in horror. Walter grabbed my shoulder hard. "Don't stare at it too long." "Those are people," I whispered. Walter didn't answer. Because he knew I was right. The pounding upstairs suddenly stopped. Complete silence filled the cellar. No scratching. No screams. Nothing. And somehow that terrified me more. Walter slowly lifted a shotgun. "They're listening now." The lantern hanging above us flickered weakly. The shadows around the cellar walls seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Every few seconds I thought I saw movement inside them, shapes crawling just beyond the edge of the light. Then came a voice. Soft. Directly above us. "Walter, A woman's voice.
Old. Weak.
Walter visibly froze. "Don't answer," he muttered immediately. The voice came again. "Walter, please." I watched his hands tremble around the shotgun. "Who is that?" His jaw tightened. "My wife." Cold dread spread through my chest. "You said your wife died." "She did." The voice above us began crying softly. Not fake crying. Real crying. The kind that tears through your chest when you hear it. "Please let me in." Walter closed his eyes tightly. "It learns voices," he whispered. "Memories, too." Something scratched slowly across the cellar doors overhead. Then another voice joined in. Buck. Then Elena. Then the college worker, who vanished the first night. All of them begging softly outside. The orchard was using them. Walter suddenly stood up. "I need to show you something. Now. If we stay down here until morning, it'll corner us." The cellar shook again as another deep breath echoed beneath the earth. Walter lifted the lantern and motioned for me to follow him deeper underground. At the very back of the cellar sat a narrow tunnel hidden behind old shelves. The walls were reinforced with rotting wooden beams, and thick roots covered nearly every surface. As we moved farther down, the temperature dropped sharply. Soon our breath fogged the air. The tunnel descended for what felt like forever. Then I noticed strange markings carved into the walls. Names. Hundreds of names. Some fresh. Some ancient. I stopped when I recognized one. Buck Harrison. Underneath it, scratched deeply into the wood, were the words. "Still hungry." "What is this place?" I whispered. Walter's voice echoed weakly ahead of me. "The miners built these tunnels first." We entered a massive underground chamber, and I nearly dropped the lantern. The cave was enormous, and every inch of it was filled with roots. Gigantic black roots twisted through the walls and ceiling like veins beneath skin. Some were as thick as tree trunks. Others moved slowly across the ground like snakes. At the center of the cavern stood something impossible. A tree. Not a normal tree. This thing towered through the cave, so high, its branches vanished into darkness above. Its bark looked black and wet, pulsing faintly like living flesh. And hanging from its branches were bodies. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Some skeletal, some fresh. All suspended by roots wrapped tightly around their throats. My stomach turned violently. What the hell is this? Walter stared up at the massive tree with hollow eyes. The orchard. One of the hanging bodies suddenly moved. Its head slowly turned toward me. I stumbled backward. The corpse smiled. Then another body moved. Then another. Soft creaking sounds echoed through the cavern as hanging corpses gently swayed above us. Some began whispering. Others giggled quietly. One of them opened its eyes. And I recognized the face immediately. Buck. His skin had turned gray and root-like. Thin vines protruded from his mouth and eye sockets. Yet somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. His lips twitched weakly. "Run." The roots around his throat tightened instantly. His neck snapped sideways with a horrible crack. But the smile remained on his face. Walter looked away. "It doesn't let them die fully." A low rumbling suddenly echoed through the cavern. The roots across the floor began moving violently. Walter's eyes widened. "It knows we're here." The massive tree groaned overhead like shifting wood during a storm. Then something started descending from the branches above. Slowly, a huge figure crawling downward upside down through the roots. Its limbs bent backward unnaturally as it moved. And its face.
God.
Its face looked almost human now. The smiling creature from the orchard. Except this close, I could see hundreds of faces moving beneath its bark-like skin, silently screaming beneath the surface. Walter raised the shotgun. It used to be the first owner. The creature tilted its head sharply toward him. Then it spoke. "Walter." Its voice sounded like dozens speaking together. "You stayed." Walter's hands shook violently. "You took enough already." The creature smiled wider. "Not enough." Then suddenly, every root in the cavern moved at once. The floor exploded beneath us. Roots shot upward like spears. Walter shoved me aside just before one impaled his shoulder straight through. He screamed and fired the shotgun directly into the creature's face. The blast tore chunks of bark and flesh away, revealing human skulls fused beneath the surface. But the thing barely reacted. Instead, it lunged, far too fast for something its size. Walter screamed at me. "Run!" I sprinted blindly through the cavern as roots burst from the walls around me. The entire underground shook violently now. Dirt and stone rained from above, while deafening screeches echoed through the tunnels. Behind me, Walter continued firing. Then I heard him scream. Not from pain. From terror. I glanced back once. That mistake nearly killed me. The creature had unfolded itself fully now. It wasn't merely tall. It was enormous. At least 15 feet long with limbs like twisted branches. Human bodies protruded from its torso, half absorbed into the bark. And Walter was being dragged into its chest. Roots wrapped around his arms and legs while his body slowly sank into the creature's torso, like quicksand. He looked directly at me one final time, then shouted, "Burn the orchard!" The creature's chest split open vertically. Inside were faces. Thousands of faces twisting together beneath flesh and roots. Walter vanished into them screaming. Then the creature smiled at me again and began crawling toward me across the cavern ceiling.
Fast.
I ran harder than I ever have in my life. The tunnels twisted endlessly beneath the orchard while the creature chased me overhead through the roots. Sometimes I caught glimpses of it moving beside me in the darkness. Smiling. Always smiling. Then suddenly I saw moonlight ahead. An exit. I burst out of the tunnel gasping into the freezing night air and froze immediately. I was standing in row 13. Except now I finally understood why the rows moved. The orchard itself was rearranging. The trees around me shifted slowly in the darkness, their roots dragging through the soil with wet grinding sounds. Entire rows bent unnaturally toward the center of the orchard like living things.
Toward me.
Then the bells began ringing again.
Dong, dong, dong.
All across the orchard, figures emerged between the trees. Workers.
Children.
Farmers. Dozens of smiling faces staring toward row 13. And behind them all, the woman in white stepped from the fog. Up close, she looked horribly wrong. Her skin resembled cracked porcelain. Roots protruded from beneath her bare feet into the soil itself. Her smile stretched nearly ear to ear. "You saw the heart," she whispered softly. I backed away slowly. "What are you?" Her head tilted. "A seed." The ground beneath row 13 suddenly moved. Not shaking. Breathing. The earth split open slightly at my feet, and pale roots began crawling upward through the dirt like fingers searching for me. Then the woman whispered something that made my blood freeze completely. "It wants your face next." The roots burst from the ground around my legs. I barely jumped back in time before they wrapped around my ankles like living snakes. The soil in row 13 heaved violently beneath me, breathing in slow, massive pulses like the earth itself was alive. The woman in white didn't move. She simply watched me with that impossible smile. All around us, the orchard creaked and shifted in the darkness. Trees bent inward slowly, their branches twisting together overhead until row 13 became a cage of bark and leaves. And everywhere I looked, smiling faces stood between the trees. Watching. Waiting. The bells continued ringing somewhere deep in the fog.
Dong, dong, dong.
"You belong here now," the woman whispered. Then every face in the orchard turned toward me at once. I ran. Branches clawed at my face as I sprinted blindly through the rows. Behind me, roots erupted from the ground with violent cracking sounds, chasing after me beneath the soil. The orchard didn't feel random anymore. It felt intelligent. Every row twisted to trap me. Every path curved back toward row 13. At one point, I passed the same scarecrow 3 separate times, despite running in different directions. Its burlap face now had human teeth stitched into it, and each time I passed, its head had turned slightly more toward me. I could hear the creature moving overhead through the trees. Huge branches snapped under its weight while distant whistling echoed from every direction. Sometimes the whistles sounded close enough to touch. Sometimes it came from underground. Then I saw lights ahead. The farmhouse. For one desperate second, hope returned. I burst through the front door and slammed it shut behind me. Silence. The house was empty.
Dark.
The old wooden floors creaked beneath my feet as I staggered into the kitchen, searching for anything useful. That's when I noticed the photographs covering the walls. I hadn't seen them before. Dozens of black and white photos. Workers standing beside apple trees. Families smiling during harvest season. Children playing near the orchard. And in every single photograph, there was one extra figure standing somewhere in the background.
Tall.
Smiling. Watching the camera. The same creature. In photos dating back over 100 years. My blood turned cold. This thing had been here the entire time. Then I noticed Walter in one of the newer photos. Standing beside a woman and a little girl. His family. Written beneath the frame were 3 words. First year of harvest. A horrible realization hit me. Walter hadn't stayed because he worked here. He stayed because the orchard had taken his family. And he'd been feeding it ever since. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I froze. Slow footsteps moved across the second-floor ceiling. Heavy footsteps. Not human. Then came the whistle. Inside the house. I grabbed a rusted fireplace poker and slowly backed toward the stairs. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but outside was worse now. The footsteps stopped directly above me. Silence filled the farmhouse. Then something began crawling across the ceiling. The wood groaned overhead as massive weight shifted slowly through the darkness. Dust drifted down. A wet sound followed, like roots dragging across wood. Then the ceiling cracked. A black root punched through the plaster inches from my face. Another burst through beside it. Then another. The entire ceiling split apart violently as the creature dropped into the room. I finally saw it clearly. Not bark. Not flesh.
Both.
Its body looked grown rather than born. Human limbs twisted within tree-like muscle and wet roots pulsed beneath cracked skin. Faces constantly shifted across its torso. Workers, children, strangers, all silently screaming beneath the surface. And, at the center of its chest, Walter's face stared out at me. Still alive. His mouth moved weakly. Burn it. The creature's smile widened unnaturally. Then it lunged. I barely escaped as its arm smashed through the kitchen wall behind me. Splinters exploded across the room while roots spread rapidly through the floorboards beneath its body. The entire farmhouse began changing. Walls warped. Roots burst through the ceiling and floors everywhere, consuming the house from within like veins spreading through flesh. The orchard was growing into it. I sprinted toward the garage beside the farmhouse, while the creature crawled after me through collapsing walls. Its limbs bent impossibly as it moved, climbing across ceilings and walls faster than anything that size should. Inside the garage sat old farming equipment coated in dust. And gasoline. Dozens of fuel cans. My heart pounded. Walter's final words echoed in my head. Burn the orchard. Outside, the fog thickened around the property, while smiling figures emerged slowly between the trees. Coming closer. The woman in white stood among them now. Still watching. I grabbed the gasoline cans and started pouring wildly across the garage floor. The walls, the equipment, everything. The creature crawled into the doorway. It seemed almost amused. You cannot kill roots, it whispered through dozens of overlapping voices. Walter's face protruded briefly from its chest again. Now, I threw the lantern. The garage exploded into flames instantly. The blast hurled me backward into the mud outside, while fire consumed the building behind me. The creature shrieked for the first time, not human screams, but something deeper, ancient. The orchard reacted immediately. Every tree began shaking violently. Roots burst from the ground everywhere around me while deafening screams echoed beneath the earth itself. Fire spread rapidly from the garage into nearby rows of trees. And the trees burned fast. Too fast. Like they were soaked in oil. The smiling figures throughout the orchard began collapsing one by one as flames spread through the roots beneath them. Some screamed. Others simply kept smiling while burning alive. The woman in white finally looked afraid. The ground split open beneath row 13 with a thunderous crack, and something beneath the orchard began rising. At first, I thought it was another tree. Then I realized the horrifying truth. The entire orchard had been growing from one massive thing buried underground. A colossal body. Roots and flesh fused together beneath the hills for miles. The creature I'd been running from wasn't the orchard. It was only part of it. The earth erupted as enormous root-covered limbs clawed upward from beneath the rows. Thousands of human faces writhed beneath bark-like skin, all screaming together now. The orchard itself was waking up. Flames spread wildly across the hills as the gigantic thing beneath the ground convulsed violently. Trees toppled everywhere while the fog turned black from smoke. Then every face across the creature's body looked directly at me, including Walter's. And together they whispered one final sentence. Harvest never ends. The ground beneath me collapsed. I fell hard into darkness as burning roots and soil crashed around me. For several seconds, everything disappeared into smoke and screaming. Then silence. When I woke up, morning sunlight shone across my face. The orchard was gone. Completely gone. Miles of burned earth stretched across the hills where the trees once stood. Smoke rose from blackened soil while emergency vehicles surrounded the property in the distance. Police claimed a gas explosion destroyed the farm. No bodies were ever recovered. Not Walter. Not the workers. Nothing. I told the authorities everything. Naturally, nobody believed me. Eventually, I left Michigan. I tried moving on. Tried forgetting. But some nights, I still hear whistling outside my apartment window.
Soft.
Distant. Waiting. And 3 weeks ago, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single perfect red apple.
Fresh.
Unburned. With a note attached. The handwriting looked strangely familiar. It said, "Harvest begins again next fall."